Thank you so much for joining. I think where I want to start is with the scope, the size, all of the different things that the National Women's Law Center is doing, and kind of how that informs what you're working on.
Sure. So I always like to liken our work to an Audre Lorde quote, which she said, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue
Mm.
lives." And that is what the National Women's Law Center believes. Women and girls in particular, but really none of us lead single issue lives. When we wake up in the morning to when we go to sleep at night, it's not like as a woman myself, I'm not experiencing just an issue with childcare or just an issue around my reproductive health or my health in general, right? I'm not experiencing any of those things in silos. And so we work on a number of those issues. And I think our sort of what I like to call our unique value proposition, if you will, is that we're able to connect the dots across a lot of those issues and help people understand that when we talk about the areas that you might experience discrimination, oppression, unequal rights, unjust practices in this country, that we need to talk about how they all affect each other and how those areas are lived.
Yeah, they're also related. They might,
Yeah.
I mean, both implicitly and obviously they are related. Do, do you feel like we're living? I mean, this you could point to any time in human history and say there's a struggle and it is difficult. Do you feel like we are living in a time where there is more difficulty?
That's a great question. Such a good question. We talk about this sometimes here. And I talk about it like even in my own life, right? Like I'm a child of immigrants, and so I'm often thinking about like, wow, this am I allowed to say bad words
Yeah,
here? I don't
you
even know.
can. You can. All I have to do is click a button that says explicit. Absolutely. Let's go.
I was gonna say, like, this shit feels
Yeah.
hard, right? When you're in it, you're like, this shit feels really hard. It feels like there are fires all around us. But then I look back and think about my parents and when they immigrated to this country and what they had to deal with and what they had to face. And also in an age of less information, which I think is sometimes probably more simplistic and beautiful in a lot of ways because we're so over inundated by content and information. But at the same time, they didn't have a lot of the resources that we all have right
Yeah.
available to us right now and today and being able to be connected. So I often think about that in my own personal life too, is like, is it harder, or has it always been hard in cycles or in
Yeah.
waves and just in different um, and for different people? And so I think as a country, I would say I think it certainly can feel harder because for folks, for most of us with a consciousness right now, right, we just came out of a global pandemic. And so that was really hard. That was so incredibly transformative and difficult to process and get through and do so being impacted by all of the issues that the law center certainly works on. And so it does feel harder. And I don't want to take away from that, but I would actually reframe it to say, I think we're at a tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that whether we want it, whether it gets harder or not, is up to a lot of us. There's a lot of power that people have right now to exercise, and so it's really up to us to decide how hard we want it to get.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing right there is that I am all for non-polite discourse when it comes to discrimination. Like just the fact that, like, I mean, there's the very real asking of I've never been on this podcast before. Can we swear? But there is that part. It's like, well, should we be polite when we're talking about obvious discrimination, intersectionality, a lot of things? No, no, I don't. I'm a firm believer of no. I think I mean, depends on the circumstance. I think sure, if you're on Capitol Hill and you're or you're being deposed, maybe, but otherwise, no. I think it has to kind of rise through the noise, and I think a little bit of righteous anger is required.
I wholeheartedly agree. I would also go into, I often, why do a lot of people conflate being honest with being unkind or being impolite? And so I would actually say, I think we should be
Yes.
honest. And I think that there are people who are a little too
Hmm.
precious who take that honesty to say, well, you're being impolite. Well, I think you trying to squash my rights to control my own body is
Hmm.
impolite. So, so I actually think it's just being honest about what's happening.
Yeah, and I think one of the bad faith arguments used in a variety of ways, right, is always, well, we're not having the conversation the right way, or we should be more polite about it. It's one of the easiest ways to shout down an idea or something that seems, pretty benign and pretty easy to explain. That part, I
Yeah.
think, is pretty obvious. I think I asked the question about, like, I'm not one of those people that's like, we live in unprecedented times. Like, no, I think there are. I think it's just that the fights are changing and shifting. I think I think there's a inevitability in a pendulum that swings with progress, right? Certainly we're better off than we were 100 years ago in a lot of ways, or even 50. But when good things happen, there is always a pushback, right? And when things happen, so the Dobbs decision obviously creates new fights. I didn't think we were going to have a conversation about IVF. We're now having a conversation about IVF. So the goalposts are shifting. The conversations are shifting, and they're seeming to be un, unduly repressive.
Yeah, I think I agree with that phrase. Unduly repressive is right. Like, what are we actually trying to do right now? Why is this happening? But what you're talking about is key here because the point is to repress, to oppress, to
Yeah.
control. And that's the point, right? That's the whole point. I mean, it's interesting that you said that you didn't think we'd be talking about IVF. I mean, same, but at the same time, I'm also not
Correct.
surprised because we weren't surprised when Dobbs happened. This has been a 50-year the extremist right wing folks in this country who have a singular extremist view of what it means to be a human being and what rights you should and should have and who's allowed to have those rights is they've been holding a grudge
Hmm.
for 50 years and they've been working real hard to win their grudge, basically, right? To right size that for themselves, not from any other people, but simply for themselves. So a lot of these things aren't that surprising. I remember after the leak happened in the Dobbs case, I got so many text messages and phone calls from friends, from some family members, from like all sorts of people who are fairly progressive and who also I thought were really well read. And it was a really interesting moment for me because they all were saying a version of the same thing. And it was, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I can't believe we're here. How did this happen? And I remember thinking to myself, the actual F,
Hmm.
because how are you surprised as a well read person? How are you surprised? And I realized that, like, that story, that part of the story where the extremists have been carrying a grudge for 50 years and are doing everything they can to regain their perceived lost power, is that story hasn't been told
Right.
enough, right? So you have all these people who went like, okay, Roe, we're fine,
Hmm.
and haven't been hearing that, like, actually the real part of the story about what's happening on under like the undercurrent of it all. And that was a real interesting turning point for me because I went, oh, okay. I even the most well read, the most up to date, the most sort of in the know folks who were texting me were shocked.
Yeah, because they
We're completely
still live in
shocked.
an echo chamber. That's the problem. We all
Yeah.
live in an echo chamber, no matter how much we try not to. We all see a different version of the internet. We all consume different content. The algorithm tells us what we want to hear and what we want to see. And as hard as I try to force myself to take in other parts of news, I will clearly have my own leanings. I will have my own thoughts, and things will feel more comfortable than others, but that's where you get to a point where people get surprised because like, well, that can't possibly
Yes.
happen. right? There's
Yeah.
legal precedent, right? Or there's this. And I think that was a wake up call for everyone to, not assume that any right or any, established law is guaranteed, especially if there is a long running campaign to change that. That's not the only thing that you're doing. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, that's a thing that we also talk about at our work in the law center. There's a difference between defending a right and protecting one.
Yes.
Those are two different things, right? Once a right is, and rights aren't necessarily always enshrined, and where they are or are not enshrined is up to sort of a lot of different interpretations. But there are clear distinctions between defending and protecting
Yeah,
rights. So,
it's like if
yeah.
you look over the course of the last 100 years of global history, American history, these things can ebb and flow, right? That we live in a democracy, but we also live, where a plurality can win enough seats and change. The weirdest thing, right, is that this is not popular. A lot of these decisions, that's the one thing I like. Take politics aside, right, or take leanings aside. The most of these issues that you are talking about and working on are not popular, especially IVF, right? That one is definitely not popular, right? The pulling back of women's reproductive rights, not popular. Probably a little harder on pay gap, but still not popular. So, you know, do you feel like does it help that there's public support behind these things, or is it still a challenge because there's a system that you have to navigate?
There's there's so much I mean, there's so much public support, and poll after poll and survey after survey and whatever other listening device or measuring device goes out. Whatever that looks like is comes back with the same information. The majority of people in this country support equality. The majority of
Yeah.
people in this country support their right to reproductive freedom to control when and where and how you start a family. The majority of people in this country support equal pay, et cetera, right? So that piece, and we're trying to, I think, collectively as a movement and as a body of organizations like ours and others, trying to remind folks of that. And in some ways we have to do that work, and in other ways, elections and things
Yep.
like that tell those stories really clearly as well. But I think the like false narrative that we keep coming up against, and where I think the extremists have sort of weaponized this in a way and turned it in a way that they've been able to get support for themselves, is the austerity narrative, which is more for me means less for you,
Yeah.
and or excuse me, more for you means less for me, both, right? Vice
Right.
versa.
It's that
And
pushback to
so
inclusion, and like inclusion can't exist without me losing something.
exactly. And so and that's, you're seeing that result in this pushback against DEIB efforts
Yes.
unnecessarily, book bans, right? Which is this wild, who you were talking about, you're surprised to see IVF. I'm surprised that we're going back into book bans,
Yeah.
that we're going into a space, but that's how it's winning to say a piece of literature that helps educate one child or tell a more complete story about a moment in history or whatever it might be. Because it's that way for that child or for this group of people, it immediately means harm. It could immediately mean harm for another group of people, which is completely fake and completely unreal. But it is a thing that, again, leaning into that broader austerity narrative, that is moving people, which is really unfortunate and really problematic, because like the way we all progress and the way we all have prosperity in this country is through collective action, through collective rights and collective wins. And so, I think what's unfortunate is when people are letting themselves be duped by these groups to say like, okay, yeah, I'm going to buy into that. They don't realize that ultimately they're hurting themselves.
Well,
Ultimately, they're hurting their own rights, right?
that's the toughest thing, but fear is such a strong motivator, right?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
the playbook to me, right, even if the book thing is not new, that's been done countless times, right? If you study history,
Right.
but the playbook is not new for anyone who wants to use fear as the strongest motivator. It's always been it's fear of the other, it's fear of you losing something, it's fear of losing control. And all of those things take on different forms, right? We have a long history of this country of take immigrant group X, Y, or Z over the last 150 years. At one point or another, that group it was feared. And so while that shifts and that changes and that evolves, that's constantly used, right? It's being used in, quite overtly right now when you talk about border discussions. The one thing I'm always fascinated by is if you look at the demographics of who's the most concerned with the border, they don't live anywhere near the border. You know, they're just consuming.
Mm-hmm.
They're just consuming the news. But that's the other thing too, is to relate to when you talk about book bans, right? The more you are informed, the more you are exposed to other people's lived experience, the more you know about other people, the more you stop seeing other people as threats, and you understand people's humanity.
Just saying this to a friend, this is a personal opinion, but I don't know that I'm alone in it, is that I think one of the greatest threats to our national security, both internally and externally, is the state of our public education
Mm-hmm.
system in this country, and like where and also the regressiveness, right? We've made a lot of progress,
Sure.
but the regressiveness that we're facing, taking away books from kids,
Mm-hmm.
limiting different types of education in schools, not having consistent measures in different schools across the country. I think that is and to say it more positively, that is the greatest area of growth and opportunity. So for folks who claim to be uh, you know pro America, if you will, yet seem to not want to invest in all of the things that are needed to help our kids get educated in the right way, to teach them compassionately and
Mm-hmm.
factually about all of the issues. I think is again is wild, but also not surprising, right? Because the people who claim to be pro-life don't do a whole lot to help people live in this country. So
Right.
there's also
There
that part.
is that irony. Yes. Do you think the toothpaste is out of the tube, or do you think we can get to a point where we have reasonable compromise and discourse? I know this is
I
the
have so much
toughest
to
question.
say about the tooth. I was gonna say, well, I'm getting stuck on is like the toothpaste in the tube. Like, do we even want to put it back in the tube
I
if
mean
it's out of
that
the tube? Like,
well,
what do we
yes,
do
no,
with the
no,
tooth?
I this might have been the wrong metaphor because clearly you cannot. I mean, you can. What you do is you then take the toothpaste tube, you then cut it down the middle in half, and then you can get the toothpaste back
Yeah,
in the
I would do
tube.
that, and so we duct tape
Yeah,
it back
there are
together.
ways, but
Um,
really where I'm getting at is like I think starting in 2000, maybe even before, I think we have been on a slow progression towards we're not here to we're not here to legislate. We're here to perform. I mean, if you look at the way social media is, right, and I'll call out both parties on this, right, that it's not necessarily about making legislation as much as it's about owning the headline and owning the news cycle and fundraising and being on social media. That it's tougher. It's tougher and then also probably just you keep hitting a brick wall over and over and over again. It just becomes tougher. I mean, but without looking at the stats, I would assume we're passing less and less legislation, and we're definitely compromising less. And so the important part is the people that can actually make the decisions. But just as in general, from a general population standpoint, can we get back to a point where we're willing to talk about compromises in our discourse, or do you think we are just forever going to fracture?
I think the I think that we have no choice but to get back to discourse and compromise, and um, so my that is my hope.
Yeah.
I think there are certainly things I see happening that feel really scary for me and make me
Hmm.
wonder if we'll get there. But to go back to your analogy and your question, I do think that we can clean up the toothpaste and build a different tube
There you go.
so that we're not, and I think that's really the question is are we still trying to operate in the same system, or are we actually trying to make improvements that are more sustainable, that help those who for some reason feel so disenfranchised that they are succumbing to fear and they are succumbing to these like fake austerity narratives, right? To help bring them back into the fold. How do we create a different tube to have everyone understand that their progress means shared progress?
Yeah, I mean the the cynical economic argument, right, for diversity, equity, inclusion is just the more people are succeeding, the more other people will succeed, right? From an economic standpoint, you do not want to have people not succeeding if you are in totality trying to create a better economy. If you are trying to hold on to money yourself, sure, totally get it.
Right. I mean, I talked about this the other day because it was equal pay day and it was
Yeah,
like sort of average equal pay day on March 12th, which is hilarious because we talk about it as though it's a celebration when equal pay day is in fact far from it.
right.
But it was average equal pay day, right? Which means that on average by race, by slight, however you slice and dice it, that was the day. I think it was 84 cent, women make on average 84 cents to the dollar. Um, but we were talking about how that's worse in particular for Black, Latina, and Native women.
Absolutely.
And Native women, I was saying this, the Native women will lose, I think that lose over $1.2 million to the wage gap over the course of their career, over the course of a lifetime, right? That's a lifetime loss of earnings,
Mhm.
wages they should have been paid. Latinos in this country, I think the latest stat is have excess of $3 trillion in buying power in this country. And women in particular make the majority of spending decisions for their households. So we're we're robbing them, but we're also robbing
Yeah.
ourselves. We're also robbing our full and whole economy and collective progress when you look at stats like that side by side and what that means. So, anyway, check plus to what you just
Yeah,
said.
I mean that's the one thing. It's like sometimes you'd want to just make a human argument that it's like no, like you're not going to have to lose for another person to get equality, not to gain, just to get equality. But yeah, sometimes even just the cynical like, hey, if all you care about is money, right, or if all you care about is this, like this is actually better, like proven over economic statistics and stats, this would actually be better. The more people that are able to buy your stuff, the more you will profit. I think that's the bigger conversation, right? When you talk about equal pay, is it's not that it's not doable, right? It's like, where does that money come from? Well, that money would come from the profit center of the company. Is the company doing pretty well? Great. Okay. So
Virginia's Governor Youngkin just shot down a pay transparency bill, right? Pay transparency laws are things that we
yeah,
advocate for. It's super simple. It's really not that complicated. List the salary on the job description. Why is that so hard? You already have a range that you think you're going to pay somebody.
yeah,
It helps hold companies accountable. It helps people also say, I'm not going to waste I can't earn that. I need to earn more, or whatever it is, or that seems great. All of the things they know, all of the pieces. It's very simple. It's a pay range. It's again, you're not like holding someone to the dollar. Now, some companies have these wildly expansive pay transparency scales that they put on their job descriptions, and like that's also a little
oh,
messed
there's
up.
always
But
workarounds.
generally
Yeah, of
speaking,
course.
yes, exactly. Those are loopholes, and like that's not the point here. But okay, fine. But they have it, and he shot it down, and it was, and I can't quote him exactly, but one of the things he said was there would be an undue burden on companies, and I was like, what is the undue burden
Mm,
to add a bullet point in a job posting that you're already putting to add information that you already have?
well,
Is it so therefore the undue burden is the financial aspect. So that means that you're saying that all those companies were planning to save money and put in their pockets money they should be
mhm,
paying
yeah,
women, and that's the undue burden. What the again? because you said I could. What the F are we talking about right now? Like, how is that reasonable?
No,
Anyway,
I just think sometimes we're mad at the wrong people, right? Or we're diverting the
yeah,
attention to the wrong people, right? It's like, it's
yeah.
like, hey, Jeff, you're a straight white male. Are you worried about losing money if somebody else gets there? No, not at all, because I believe, one, that's fair. That should happen. That should occur. That is a better company. That is a better work culture. There are a lot of intrinsic factors. No, I don't understand. I understand the thought process. I understand how somebody gets there. I live in the Midwest, aka the Rust Belt. I understand why there are plenty of people who have seen jobs go away, things go away, so they feel like they are losing, right? There's a, I I'm always, again, coming back to, I'm surprised and not surprised when those things happen, especially like the income thing. But that's the other thing too. So not to get too far in the weeds on that specific example, but I think this is interesting too. We also live in we live in a culture now where there are a lot of remote jobs, and so that scale then is not just for uh, a wide range, right? That's one of the loopholes that we talked about. The other thing is, where do you live? Because where do you live, based on there are different pay scales for remote workers based on where you are, right? Now, that's another loophole to say, yes, our company is out in San Francisco, but because you are in Iowa, and we know that the standard of living over there is a little lower, we're going to pay you a little less, right? So another way to find a workaround with that, right?
And we go back to the start of this conversation, which is people don't live single issue lives. And I, look at the states in particular where there are abortion bans or where are there limits to reproductive freedom. And that is, again, whether, when, and how you start a
Mhm.
family is a huge indicator on economic prosperity and your ability to thrive. And so if you're already looking at excess wage gaps in those states, and now these just heartbreaking and ridiculous bans and restrictions on top of it all, what are we talking
Well, and
about?
then
So
there are a lot of people who cynically will say, it's fine. I live in California. I live in New York. I live in a very blue state. I'll be fine. Okay. Maybe not. There are a lot of
maybe not. Well,
there are a lot of things that are presented as states' rights issues that very clearly are intended to become national issues. Those have already been discussed. So those are things that it's like, I don't think anybody is able to avoid the impact of repressive legislation. Um, I've done 26 minutes of unhappy, non-fun talk because it was done on purpose. Because I, I want to just hammer the idea home that you shouldn't be resting, you shouldn't be uninformed, you shouldn't be banning books, and you shouldn't be putting your head in the sand like an ostrich. But shifting gears a little bit, talk to me about Culture Lab, why it was started.
so
I
okay,
know,
we're
I
turning
know.
around.
Quick pivot, quick
We're
pivot.
turning. Um, So the culture lab, it was sort of like a loose concept at the law center, which is, we were coming from, I'm now the chief external affairs officer, and but when I first started the law center, it was the vice president for campaigns and communications. And when you look at content creation or campaigns and communications as functions, like for all the PR comms organizing nerds out in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like those are looked at as like functions in terms of how they are. Um, Structured, I guess, and housed in different organizations. And so the thing that we were talking about, or that I was sort of thinking through, and along with my colleagues at the Law Center, is, we use law and policy change as levers
Hmm.
for progress and as tools in our work. But at the same time, we also that when you looked at what the impact was of comms and content work and campaigns work, it wasn't just like to quote unquote get a tweet out, right,
Yeah.
or to put a video out, or to quote unquote tell a story. That isn't the point. The point was always to help people, to change hearts and minds, to help people
Hmm.
think about issues differently, to tell and understand stories differently, and to collectively understand all of that in a way that would ultimately change the cultural fabric of this country. And so, and that's kind of how the Cultural Lab came up, is that it was really that work that we're doing is testing new strategies in culture change and shifting narratives around these issues, because we believe that law and policy change are in constant conversation with cultural change.
Absolutely.
You know, we like to do a, again, to nerd out, we definitely had this moment where we were like, can we plot it on a line where we say culture change happens
Hmm.
here, and then law change happen, or the like changes in laws, or um, you know, legal guardrails, et cetera, happen here, and policy happens over there. And we're like, no, it has to happen in constant conversation with each other. When you look at the hashtag Me Too going
Yes.
viral, that happened because of, certainly because of a legal case that had come to
Hmm.
fruition, but then that moment and that incredible tipping point in history that happened also created a lot of policy shifts and a lot of new requirements, in states, you know, federally. We're looking at new Title IX rules, all of these things, that came from a big cultural moment. At the same time, there are moments like when you look at Title IX, the original Title
Yeah.
IX, 1972, and what that did for athletics, women's sports. We're now in a moment of reckoning, excuse me, with trans rights and trans women
Yes.
and their ability to play sports and what that looks like. And it's just this, you know, that it's this deep and inherent belief that we can't do one without the others. And so we needed to, and we're always testing it, because as you pointed out, we're earlier, right, like we're getting all of this information, we're constantly being inundated, so we constantly have to test, and be open to shifting. And so that's the Culture Lab.
And then let me again take it to a dark place. But when no, but that is important because I think you have to have public sentiment and public momentum, right, in concert with like law and policy take us a long time. But clearly, when people see momentum, right, and they see cultural shifts, right, whether that was decisions on gay marriage, once you start to see the overwhelming support for that, right? Or legalization of marijuana, a variety of issues. Once you started to see, you know, people tended to shift. Now I could go into a lot of different things on those policies. I won't. The one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was Title IX, because there is a potential in which right now most athletic departments are funded by football. That's an obvious. If we get to the point where all of these major football programs decide to just break off and do their own thing, because the NCAA right now does not really have jurisdiction over anyone, there is a potential. I'm sure this is being thought about already, but I was curious on your thoughts. There is a potential that obviously those scholarships have to equal out. That's the whole point of Title IX, right? You have to have equal scholarships for men and women. But if the football programs leave and they create their own super league, that's going to eliminate opportunity. It's going to eliminate the ability to fund a lot of these sports, especially women's sports, because they're not revenue generators outside of women's basketball right now, which is definitely improving and having a moment. But is there a concern of just the lack of opportunities and representation? If something like that occurs.
You know, I think there is some concern over it. I think we're really preoccupied right now with, the updates to the Title IX rules that we put forward last year, and so I think that those are certainly what you named um, uh, are definitely external factors that could really shift. No pun intended, but shift the playing field for folks and what
No,
that
that's
looks
accurate.
like. But we're pun intended, but we are at the law center in particular. There are new Title IX rules that the administration has promised to pass, and those have, um, put in some really basic safeguards and protections, especially for LGBTQIA
Mm-hmm.
youth, and for strengthening, um, how survivors of sexual harassment and assault on campuses
Yes.
can have access to justice, to, and overturn a lot of like the problematic Betsy DeVos rules that were put into place. And so for us, that's kind of foundational for us right now, that there was a promise made. People's, young people's rights are at risk right now. Protecting and defending rights is on the line. And so I think we're a little bit more focused on saying, like, let's get some of that foundational
Hmm.
stuff secured and underway before we kind of, and let's not get
Yeah.
distracted by, I think, some of the other pieces. It's not unimportant, but I think we're really laser focused on the immediate passing of
Well,
10
I think that
amendments.
part is important too, right? It's going on the offense to further solidify and protect Title IX, rather than being reactive to whatever is coming next. I mean,
Yep.
you're aware of it; those things are happening, but I think that that is the correct both like political and legal strategy is to be, and clearly what we've seen with other things is, right, if you're not on the offense, you're behind. And there's somebody clearly on the other end of that trying to work to maybe deregulate, dismantle, change that law. um I hate asking this. I hate the wording of asking this question because, and I'll tell you why. I was going to say in an election year, and I'm in the belief that every year is an election year. I think we're just in a perpetual cycle of like, yeah, it's an election year. You know, I mean, there are elections that occur every year, but every year is just either the ramp up to or the actual election year. But in an election year, which this one is technically a very large presidential election year, are there certain things that you are doing more of, to get, you know to get in front of voters? Are there specific programs? Tell me more.
The Law Center is 501(c)(3), so we are really focused on just general education about our
Yeah.
issues and reminding people that all of those issues are on the ballot, and just fundamentally believing in civic education and civic responsibility. We think everybody should be out there voting. And there are a lot of people who are like, I don't know what I can do.
No,
You have
that's one.
you can go vote. That's a real basic one that you can go do. So it's a lot of reminding folks about that, and doing a lot of public education around the issues that are on the line, right? That we work on. And we work on everything from access to housing, to ending sexual harassment and violence in workplaces and in schools, reproductive freedom, access to contraception
Hmm.
is under. I mean, we went to IVF, right?
That one's
Contraception's
next.
on the line, and there's just so much more that's on the line when we look at the makeup of the Supreme Court and the outcome there, and the effect that the Supreme Court, right, has had on a lot of the issues that the Law Center works on. So, yeah, we're definitely out in the world trying to help people understand how it's all
Sure.
connected, that it's what is on the line, even beyond what people can sort of conceptualize, like what's in front of them, right? Like Supreme Court as a concept is not a thing that everyone goes, yeah, yeah, that's on the line in an election. Well, I mean, and this is, and you kind of said it, I think about this earlier, that silver lining of
Hmm.
Dobbs. It was a big wake up
Yeah.
call for folks, and also I think a really big, interesting education point for people to understand the impact of the Supreme Court and the impact of elections on a Supreme Court and the math of what that all looks like. So yeah, we're out in all the streets trying to get people to figure it out. Stay with us. It's all related. It's all on the line.
Yeah, I mean, and that's again, it's not single issue, right? It's talking about things in totality. I mean, I think you can certainly get into specificity, but I think making that clarity that okay, we clearly see what the leaning of that court might be. We understand what might be coming down the road. What is plausible. It's that balance too of like we're not here to scare the crap out of you, but we would like you to, know that there is a logical step one, step two, step three that could possibly occur, right?
And to the point of not scaring the crap out of people, you we have had wins,
Yeah.
right? And there, so again, going to vote and or finding other ways for you to be involved on these issues or be a part of the civic education process or the civic process more broadly speaking, well, there are wins. There are lots of wins that we can point to. And I also just said this recently, hopelessness is a strategy. Hopelessness is 100% a strategy. That it is, there are tactics, that there is a playbook.
Mm-hmm.
And so don't, you know, we talk about this a lot. It's like, don't let yourself succumb to that.
Yeah.
And it's easy to do. I mean, I get there sometimes, right? Like, I, again, live my day. I'm a parent. I've been through some hard shit in my life, like
Yeah.
all of the things. There are days when I wake up and I'm just like, this is this is terrible. I'm tired, all of the things. And so it's, I'm not saying it's not easy to do and to not give yourself space to have those feelings, but to remember that hopelessness is a strategy and that it is incumbent on all of us to remember that we have power to overcome that.
Yeah. Well, it's safe to assume if there are strategies that exist to get out the vote, there are strategies that exist to not get out the vote.
To suppress the vote.
Yes.
Yeah. Lots of strategies to suppress the
Yeah.
vote.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, that part is clear. That part, especially incumbent on this election versus others, where you have candidates that have already run. That it's very easy for people to say, "Oh, you don't have to show up. What's it going to
Yeah.
do?"
Or like, especially when you're talking about, people get caught up in like the federal part of it, right? Where like we have two, currently they're candidates right now. A lot of the language around them is unhelpful, and I think what did someone say to me, that like none of them are, neither of them are cool,
Oh,
and
yeah,
it's
that's important. It's so important. Like, yes, one of them needs to pull a Bill Clinton and play a saxophone on MTV because that would be cool.
like what, but I'm not gonna get into who specifically people should vote for, but the point is, like, that's not the point whether or not they're cool. The
No.
point is that in some way, shape, or form, your existence, your rights, however, whatever your politics are on the line, and so you should go vote.
Yeah.
Like, period. End of
Yeah.
story.
I mean, voting is really an exercise in representative government. Voting is an exercise in who do you trust more to push forward your views and what's most important to you. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
we do talk. It's so funny that we do in political discussions, we talk about single issue voters. They do exist, right? But we, again, are not single issue people. And that can kind of shift and that can kind of change. And there's a lot of things that, we're in the spring. I do not know. I do not have a crystal ball. I cannot forecast. I do not know what the conversation will be 2 months, 1 month up until an election. But we kind of know most of the conversation will be central to the issues that you work on. I think that will be very, very important, and not just one single one, but a lot of them.
A lot of them, yeah, a lot of them are going to be just going to be a lot of conversation around a lot of things, right? I mean, it's and I would also say, it always comes down to, there's foreign policy, which we don't work on.
Sure.
And there's also, and then it's the
Yep.
economy. And I think a thing that a lot of people make the mistake of thinking about when they think about quote unquote gender issues is that they're women's issues, or it's that person's thing, or it's only this one piece. Gender issues, I laid out some of those stats earlier. We've talked about a lot of different elements of it, actually are economic issues.
Absolutely.
They're issues that relate to our very democratic existence, right? There's a lot of existential questions around this great experiment we call the United States of America. So there's the biggest mistake is to think about gender justice issues as about women or about somebody else's problems. Law Center's tagline is justice for her, justice for all, because it's all related. And so to don't be that person that makes that mistake and thinks that it's about somebody else or something else
Well,
that's going on.
you're spot on. Like the economic part, that is so easy to make that connection, right? The foreign policy thing is if we become a more repressive country with less rights, with more restriction, our standing in the world changes. Who our partners are, who respects us, who wants to work with us, who wants to defend us, who wants, you know, I'm sure somebody will clip this out on Twitter and be like, Jeff, you're a globalist. But really, that is an accurate depiction of, you know, our partners are incumbent and contingent on how we project into the world what our values are. And for a long time we've judged other countries for being repressive, and if we become more repressive ourselves, that's foreign policy that changes the equation.
So it's and it's not something we can ignore.
No.
It's not something that, despite how tired we all are and how exhausting things are, it's not something that we can just sort of sweep under the rug and push to the side. Like, we need to face it head on.
When we were starting this podcast, I was like, oh no, we are adding yet another podcast in the world, which is, there are already too many. And and then
Well, the Law Center launched a podcast
Yes!
too called Hearsay. So I don't think that it's a problem
Good.
to have good and abundant podcasts in the world.
Absolutely. The other part too is then it's like I layer in, like, I'm like, well, let's have a really deep discussion about really important issues, when everybody's already probably exhausted. But I think these are just reminders that you have to have, right? No, I don't think it's possible to expect, and nor would I want people to live in a constant state of like fear, terror, what is coming next. But it's just to stay slightly aware of and where the trend lines are going. I mean, you're doing great work to do a lot of information and a lot of policy, but yes, no. Do you need to watch the news every day? No. But do you need to be aware of where things are heading? Yes.
I mean, in fact, when I get home, I really don't want to watch the news. I mean, granted, I do this as the day job, but I
Correct.
come home and I'm like, show what season of Law and Order can I binge watch to not? So everybody needs their escapism and entertainment and all the things that make them feel good, but also information is power. But I would also say, as it related to that, and especially I think relevant to this podcast, is that there is actually a responsibility and opportunity on creators of entertainment that our movies, the films we watch, the shows we see, the podcasts we listen to, all different types of content, to think about how they can weave in storylines that address the issues that we've talked about here and that we talk about at the Law Center. And it doesn't need to be the A storyline. It doesn't need to be the main purpose or point, but wouldn't it be nice if we saw caregivers visible, right?
Yes.
Like, you have parents who go on a date night. Like, where is the sitter? How are we seeing how that whole thing works? When parents go off to work, what does child's care look like? The childcare system is broken in this country. It got worse in the pandemic.
For sure.
The Law Center advocates, is a leader in that advocacy work. As a parent myself, I'm grateful for what we do in pointing out that childcare workers are the backbone of our economy. But where are they in content? Where are people making reproductive choices in content? Where are people sort of opening their paycheck, right? Harkening back to that old movie 9 to 5. But as a B or C storyline, we don't need it as the main point, right? As the main point of the film. We need to normalize and name that this shit happens. Sorry, explicit button again.
Oh, I love it. I don't have to hit an explicit button multiple times. I don't have to bleep you every time, which is great. I just have to. Oh no, it's great. I just have to on Spotify. I just be like, it's explicit, and then I wish there was those 3 chili pepper emojis for spiciness, but that would be much better. But okay, so when I finish these podcasts, I do something called Keep It Short. They are 3 questions. The questions are short.
Okay.
Your answers can be however long you would like them to be. Are you ready?
Yes.
I love the comedic use of the extended pause. Okay, question 1. Outside of obviously the National Women's Law Center, what are good resources where people can get more informed?
Your local news.
Mm.
I love local news. I believe in that strongly, and media industry is going through a lot right now. Local news, support your local news outlets and local journalists. Um, and I can't really get further than the National Women's Law Center because I think that we provide a
We are.
lot of really great
You do.
information
You
for
do. That was the challenge in the question, right? You do, and it's a wide
Mhm.
variety of stuff. I was doing research. Yeah, I was just on local news in DC talking about TikTok policy this week, which I was like, yes, let's go. Let's talk about that. I didn't know we were going to get a chance to talk about that, but I was really
Mhm.
glad that they were, willing to have that conversation about what do creators do if that is not available. I also believe very strongly that TikTok can sway the election. But if you can get people to show up to a Minions movie or Barbenheimer, I think you can sway an election. But that's just a theory. Um,
Let's see how that one
let's
plays out.
let's
Yeah.
hope let's hope it's around in November.
Mhm.
We'll see. I as a strong cynic of neither party wanting to be the party of getting rid of TikTok. And there's a 165-day lead time. I don't think there's any chance that that gets voted on before May, so that can happen before November. I just don't think either one wants to be, assigned to that.
This down. I'm gonna watch, and we'll see. We'll come back
Hmm.
to each
Hmm.
other
Hmm.
and see
Hmm.
if
Yeah,
this
yeah,
happens or
and
not.
then if it does happen, then I'm gonna have to eat my words again and be like, I just had this 50-minute discussion with you about how we should not underestimate anything, and then I underestimated something.
Don't be
Damn.
surprised. Yeah.
No, it's all absolutely possible. That was an interesting vote because it did not go along party lines. It was just like, I don't know. It was almost like you took a random drawing of people, put them into two hats, and that was the vote. Um, Question two. Reason it's a two-parter. Reason for most optimism, reason for most pessimism.
My reason for the most pessimism is um, Moms for Liberty.
Yeah.
They're, they are a hate group, and they are. Um, I think they're just. I think as a mother and as a parent, it feels not great to see those folks influencing or trying to influence people in that way. So that's my reason for the most pessimism. So I'll go generational. The reason for the most optimism are my kids.
Yeah.
They get it. They're incredibly smart. They're incredibly funny, and um, and I just think of what's possible if we really invest in them the right way and utilize their capacity and potential in the right way. I have a lot of
That's
optimism
awesome.
because of them.
Question three. Where do you think we can make the most change in the next 2 years? With a caveat that there's a lot of variables that, that could occur.
I think we can make the most change in the next 2 years.
Yeah. You can change that timeline if you'd like, but in general.
I think that where we are in this country with um, advocacy for trans
Mhm.
rights. Well, I have two. Can I have
You
two? Is that possible? I'm gonna have two. I'm gonna
we
take
make
two,
our own
but
rules
I'll
on
go
this
quickly.
podcast. Let's go.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to name two things. I think that the rights of the LGBTQIA community in this country and what we can do for the full community to, again, protect and defend their rights, in particular trans people in this country. There's just again, the regressiveness there, the dog whistling that's happening
Yeah.
across a lot of the language that's being used. It's just ridiculous, and most people know it's ridiculous, don't agree with it, and they just don't speak out enough. And I think that we have a lot of opportunity there to do right by that community and for all of us, really. The other space where I think that we can make a lot of progress in the next 2 years is our childcare system
Yeah.
in this country. The Law Center is advocating for $16 billion of an investment in childcare to expand what that means. Again, I said this earlier, childcare workers, the care economy broadly
Hmm.
is so incredibly important. It's also one of those things that is like people want to pretend like it doesn't happen. It happens all the time, everywhere. People cannot work in this country without, if parents, excuse me, cannot, actually, I would offer people cannot work in this country without childcare because the workforce includes parents.
Yeah.
And so even if you are not a parent, but you are working, you're going to have colleagues who are parents. And so if they can't work, then your life also gets adversely affected, even if you are someone who doesn't have kids or need childcare. So I think that there's a lot of potential for the repair and restoration of the childcare system in this country.
Absolutely. If you stack, again, everything being interrelated, you stack large student loans with then, large burdens of childcare, right? And a lot of things, again, you slow down people's purchasing power, and this is how we get to these situations where somebody's like, well, I'm in my 40s and I'm still on Zillow. you know it's like, just hoping, again, that slows everything down. And I think you're right. I think that's like a universal no-brainer. So both, by the
And the
way.
United States is so, yeah, and then from our everything from our parental leave policies to how we pay for and afford childcare is so backwards and behind compared to every nearly every other country in this world. So it's also just embarrassing at this
Oh,
point.
you're talking about the places that have more paternity leave than maternity leave, because that is embarrassing. Yeah.
More subsidized childcare, more affordable childcare, better wages for the childcare workforce. I mean, it's just all of it together is embarrassing.
Yeah. No. Do we want to leave people on the positive, or do we just want people to, okay?
Yes, let's do it. I mean,
No.
or not. I mean, where do you, where do
I was about ready to just say this shit is embarrassing and then hit stop, but I was like, well, maybe we just. But anyway, tell people where they can find you, talk about the podcast, all those things.
Yes, you can find us anywhere that you can get podcasts through our amazing new podcast called Hearsay, which I'm in particular proud of. Is put on by our team. If you, it's a part of the Culture Lab, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. And each episode, we have multi-generational hosts who discuss how gender, power, and the law impact pop culture.
Mm.
They cover everything like Janet Jackson in the 2004 Super
Oh
Bowl.
yeah.
Yeah, shifts on abortion narratives. They covered living single and living single versus friends in a recent episode.
Mm-hmm.
Cheerleading, I think is today. No, yesterday was Wednesday. Wednesday, a new episode dropped yesterday around cheerleading. It's amazing. It's fantastic, and you should hear it. Or you should listen to Hearsay. You can also find us on Instagram. Uh, what is it called now? X. I'm just going to
You
call
can
it
still call
Twitter.
it Twitter. Yeah.
And
No.
I'm still going to call it
Yeah.
Twitter. I refuse. And to bring us full circle, you can find us on TikTok also.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
And thank you.